Hey everybody, Jon Stewart here. The Problem with Jon Stewart returns to Apple TV Plus, I think October 7th. If it's not that exact day, don't be upset. But in the meantime, let's check in with some of our season 1 guests for a little update. Now, you might remember April Ross from our episode on guns. She came on the show and she talked about her experience with domestic violence, with being shot, and what was needed to be done to end this scourge. And April certainly is playing a big part in that.
In the prosecutor's office I worked in with the investigators, interacting with police officers every day, there was not a true understanding about domestic violence. They only see it when you get somebody black and blue in the face, and that is not what domestic violence looks like.
Now, since that episode aired, Congress finally passed some meaningful legislation, including closing the absurd boyfriend loophole that used to exist in all kinds of gun legislation. April is here to talk about how that legislation is impacting things and whether or not it's going to make a difference and what else is going to need to be done.
Hi, John. It's great to see you again and good to be back. For the work that I do, we were most notably excited about one of the provisions that started to close the boyfriend loophole by including dating partners in the federal provisions that prohibit domestic abusers from being in possession of guns under certain circumstances. And so that was a huge moment for the domestic violence community. It also did things like improving background checks for individuals under the age of 21. It included a lot of funding for states to enact extreme risk protective order legislation and programs. Also, it touched on giving funding for mental health, funding for school safety programs and security. Obviously, and many people have said it didn't go as far as they wanted, but it did do many things. And it certainly was a significant step considering that nothing had been done for many decades around gun legislation at the federal level. What I'd like to see happen in terms of gun control, obviously, we need to expand background checks. I think that there need to be more provisions around some of the domestic offenders. The boyfriend loophole is a step in the right direction for our country. That expansion is so significant. And I think also making sure that we are protecting people in those relationships, not just when crimes are committed, but also when people get protective orders. So making sure that people under protective orders are able to get them and that guns are restricted. And also in stalking instances, stalking victims, there's also a pretty high likelihood that they would be assaulted with a firearm by their stalkers. There have been some notable developments in the domestic violence, gun violence space. One that gives me concern is the growing emphasis on there being a strong link between mental health or mental health illnesses and gun violence, particularly among domestic abusers. And that's simply stated not true. Yes, there are instances where someone who is a domestic abuser also has mental health issues. But mental health issues do not cause domestic violence. They do not cause gun violence. And so it's not a simple matter of let's put all of our energy and resources into mental health and that will alleviate our issues with gun violence. I think that it needs to be made very clear to people that focusing in on mental health as a way to avoid changing gun laws is not going to solve the problem. What gives me hope, and it's sort of a backwards way of, to me, achieving what we want, but more so now, it's happening to everybody. So whether you identify as a conservative or a liberal, someone who lives rural or inner city, gun violence is affecting you. It's reaching everybody across every landscape, political and otherwise. So you've got more folks saying, well, you know what? Even though I really, really love Second Amendment rights, it also sure makes sense to avoid other families going through what my family went through when someone I loved or I was shot. It changes things when you go through it yourself. You know what I mean? When it hits close to home. And I think, unfortunately, the fact that we're seeing so much more gun violence means it's hitting close to home for a lot more people. This has always been an issue that's going to be a bottom-up solution. So the more voices are asking their representatives to do something, to change something. That plus the fact that we just had a landmark legislation, which we haven't had, gun legislation in decades in this country. Those things combined give me some hope.